Please welcome Cyma Shapiro. Thank you very much. I'm just very happy that for once somebody didn't say my age, because my age is usually the first thing I wear on my sleeve. Namaste. Shalom. Salam alaikum. I do want to welcome you all here on what's really an infamous day, a poignant day. A day which lends itself to inspection, remembrance, renewal. And so I thought it important to discuss what's most important to all of us: love, motherhood, parenthood, religion, some of the things I think we all hold dear to our heart. I'd like to offer one moment of silence before we begin. Motherhood. The word conjures up meanings and feelings for all of us. Add the words feminine, maternal, and female, and it takes your mind and your heart even further. Every person deals with motherhood at some point in their lifetime. Every woman struggles with this concept in one way or another, as an archetype, as a role model, as a standard for behavior, and the list and our internal tapes go on and on. At some point in each woman's life, she will need to come to terms with this, especially in our ever-changing contemporary society. The right path and the right route may not be so clear. And in your primary religious upbringing, or your study of a particular doctrine, or ideology, or your personal philosophy, and sometimes all of this becomes too murkier. Tonight we will feature 6 panelists representing differing religions, doctrines, who will examine the topic of motherhood and the intersection of religion, giving down to the historical perspective and discussing the relevance in today's society moving into the 21st century, and having a bearing on our most current trends: fostering, guardianship, IVF, same-sex parenting, midlife mothering, and surrogacy. We will end the evening with a Q&A, so save your questions up. I am honored to be in the company of such unbelievable women, so let me present them. The Reverend Bridget Fiddler is the Senior Minister of First Church of Christ Congregational United Church of Christ in Suffield, Connecticut. She is the mother of 2 grown children, Gwyneth and Jack. She is active in the Greater Suffield Interfaith Council and is a corporator at Hartford Seminary. She is married to the Reverend Dr. Jonathan Lee, Director of Institutional Advancement at the Hartford Seminary. Cantor Donna Gordon has served as the cantor of Temple Sinai in Newington since 2001. In her position as cantor, she is responsible for all music during religious prayer and for all music in religious school curriculum. She studies Torah, she teaches Torah study, Jewish music, bar mitzvah lessons, and biblical Hebrew to young and old alike. She is honored to officiate at life cycle events, including bar mitzvahs, weddings, and funerals. Cantor Gordon is passionate about speaking out against repression and oppression of women's education and voices not only in her own faith, but around the world. Donna has been married to her husband and best friend, Max Gordon, for 32 years. Together they have 2 adult sons, Casey of West Hartford and Matthew of Tel Aviv, Israel. And just to clear a bit of confusion, she is in the purple, she is not in the red. Pastor Stacy Burton is currently the pastor of Youth Generation Christian Center Church in Hartford. A native of Windsor, Pastor Stacy graduated from Windsor High School in 1988 and went on to continue her education at St. Joseph's in Northeastern. Pastor Stacy works for the Capital Region Educational Council. Among her other involvements include working as an advisor for the Windsor Police Cadets, president of her local union at AFSCME, Level 1303 and 132, a mentor for the Women's Leadership Academy. She loves to advocate for children with special needs and disabilities and is a former foster and adoptive parent. In 1996, she married the love of her life and is the proud mother of 5 children and 2 furry babes, Brooklyn and Bronx. Hannah Sutherland was born in Los Angeles and raised in Orange County, California. She is the third of 9 children. She has been married and living in Connecticut for 18 years. Hannah is homeschooling mother of 3 of her 5 children, the oldest will begin college this fall. Although raised as a Palestinian Muslim American, Hannah discovered her true journey to Islam as a young adult. She is pursuing a degree in psychology and special education. She recently joined Pioneer Valley Project, which helps citizens of our society have a voice against oppression of many forms. She is also a member of the Greater Suffield Interfaith Council. Debbie Humphreys is a member of the Hartford Monthly Meeting, New England Yearly Meeting of the Religious Society of Friends. She carries a concern for the strength and vitality of the group and actively ministers among Quakers in New England and beyond. Debbie has 2 sons now ages 17 and 19 who were 2 and 4 years old when she experienced a call to Quaker ministry. Debbie has served in a number of leadership positions within Hartford Monthly Meeting and New England Yearly Meeting. She has also co-facilitated a number of interactive workshops around topics such as cross-cultural communication, deepening worship, prophetic ministry. Professionally, Debbie works in the area of practice-based research and the interaction between nutrition and infectious disease. Finally, but not last and not least, Mallow Dusan is an ordained lay Buddhist minister, a certified pastoral counselor, and a mind-body energy medicine therapist, a student and practitioner of Tibetan Buddhism for 30 years with masters from Tibet. Her work is a synthesis of Eastern, Western, and contemporary approaches to personal and spiritual development. She has traveled to numerous times to Kathmandu, Nepal to further her training and engage in spiritual retreats at Buddhist monasteries and nunneries. Currently, she is co-director of Hartford KTC Tibetan Buddhist Meditation and Study Center and board chairperson of Tara Shidro, Inc. Dharma Center, and founder of Mental Holistic Health, a wellness healthcare facility located in Hartford and St. Francis Care in Avon, Connecticut. 2 things before I turn this over. Number 1, our meeting in anticipation of this event showed me that when you get down to one-on-one and set aside whatever the group may feel, miracles do happen. Number 2, I did learn that while all of these women are wonderful representations of their own doctrines, religions, and theologies, they can only speak for the sect, the group, the division for which they are now either representing or practicing. So with that, I'd like to start with the Reverend Bridget Fiddler.
Hi, good evening. So the United Church of Christ is otherwise known as the Congregational Church. They are the founders of many of our New England towns, which is why we have so many of them. You needed to belong to a congregational church in order to vote and own land. And we are the ancestors, our ancestors were the Puritans and the Pilgrims who came and established this nation. But we found our niche, I suppose, along the way in being a justice church. And maybe sometimes we're too justice-oriented, but that is where we focus a lot of our time and attention and ministry. So women have been an important part of that, even since the 1800s. We were the actual first denomination to ordain a woman, Antoinette Brown, in 1853. She was ordained, no one called her, however, but, it's a good start. But women throughout the centuries in the United Church of Christ have lived their faith through advocacy. They worked to end the practice of slavery in the United States, establish homes for poor women, support educational opportunities for women, and were active in securing the women's vote and to work for fair wages. That has not changed. As a matter of fact, from the mid-1990s to the present, since the mid-1900s to the present, we've continued to work for advocacy for women in all areas, including end of violence, to also have gender-inclusive language, issues of justice for all humankind, but particularly looking at issues around sexism and racism. So I just wanted to say a couple of things about reproductive justice. Since the 1960s, this has been an issue for the United Church of Christ. They believe that they need to support the rights of all people to bear children that they want to have, or to not to bear children, to raise the children they do have in safe and healthy environments, and to express their sexuality without oppression. Since 1971, the UCC has affirmed the right of women to the freedom of choice when it comes to their own personal medical care, including unwanted pregnancies, and has supported services that encourage responsible family planning. We have a long history in fighting for that in political terms as well. And we speak to issues even today with Hobby Lobby and other organizations that seek to limit women's rights. I'm going to let my colleague Stacy speak to the biblical issues around Christian scripture. But I will say that in amongst my studying and looking for things for this presentation, I did find some suggestions for parents who are adopting. And one of those was finding humor in the dumb things people say about adoption. And this is a quote. People will say dumb things like, "Where is her real mother?" Or "How much did you pay for him?" And what they suggest is learn to find humor in these things and take them as teachable moments. Inclusive language, being aware of our language is important. I just wanted to also point out that the United Church of Christ has worked very hard to also support the rights of LGBT parents and their rights to adopt and to raise children. And I'll just quote, the United Church of Christ in all of its settings seeks to defend the rights of all children to have loving parents without regard to sexual orientation or gender expression, and to recognize a family to be any loving, nurturing, ethical relationship between a child and one or more parents. And Christ calls on all states to evaluate prospective adoptive parents solely on the basis of their individual character and ability to parent, not on their sexual orientation or their gender identity, and to grant second parent or joint adoptions when it is in the child's best interest. So I will end there, but I think it has been a denomination that has sought to seek full rights for women in all their expressions of mothering and in
So I pick up the scripture part of where Reverend Felder left off, and I just wanted to focus a little bit on some of the scriptures and where it's found biblically in either the King James Version or the New International Version. Me, myself, being a daughter of a parent who has maybe 2 or maybe 3 generations of kids, likewise with my mother, her and her sister, they're 2 generations apart. Her and her sister are 18 years apart, and her younger sister were 12 years apart. So our family period of having children are long time spans and gaps in between. And for myself also as being a foster and adoptive mother, I have 6 children. I have one daughter that's my stepdaughter, and I have 5 children, 3 biological and 2 adopted. And I can relate to what you were saying, Reverend Felder, because one of my children is Caucasian. They always want to know, well, where did I get her from? And how did I get her? Is she your daughter? And I said, it doesn't really matter where she came from. She's my daughter, and I love her. So I just wanted to focus on a little bit of the biblical principles from the Bible of surrogacy and adoption, if you don't mind. So the first place we find the use of surrogate mother is in Genesis 16. We are told that Sarai, Abraham's wife, is unable to have children, so she gives her servant Hagar to Abram as a wife so that Sarai could have children by her. As Hagar was a slave girl, the children she would bear would be considered the legal heirs of Abram and Sarai. And if you felt you want to look that up, it's in Genesis 16, verses 1 through 16. The next set of surrogacy we have is Jacob and Rachel. Now when Rachel saw that she bore Jacob no children, Rachel indeed her sister and said to Jacob, "Give me children, or else I die." And Jacob's anger was aroused against Rachel, and he said, "I am in a place of God, who has withheld you from the fruit of the womb." So she said, "Here is my maid, Bilhah. Go into her, and she will bear a child on my knees. And I also have children by her." Then she gave him Bilhah, her maid, as a wife, and Jacob went into her. And Bilhah conceived and bore Jacob a son. Then Rachel said, "God has judged my case, and he has also heard my voice and given me a son." Therefore she called his name Dan. And Rachel and Bilhah conceived again and bore Jacob a second son. Then Rachel said, "With great wrestlings I have wrestled with my sister, and indeed have prevailed." So she has called his name Naphtali. And that's in Genesis 30 and 1 through 8. Rachel's sister Leah is having lots of children, while Rachel is having none. So she gives her handmaiden Bilhah to Jacob. And Bilhah conceives twice, producing 2 sons for Jacob, which Rachel sees in vindication of her. And through Bilhah she now has children. Under the customs of the time, Bilhah would have sat on his knees of Rachel during the childbirth, thus making the children she bore Rachel's. Later in the same chapter, when Leah sees that she is no longer able to bear children, she gives her maid Zilpah to Jacob, and Zilpah conceives and bears children for her. And that's in Genesis 30:9 through 13. That's the part of the Bible that speaks about surrogacy, because some people feel that in the Christian religion that it's not appropriate to be a surrogate or to bear children for someone else, but this is biblical. Also in the scripture it talks about adoption. The books of Exodus tells the story of a Hebrew woman who bore a son during a time when Pharaoh had ordered all of the Hebrew male infants to be put to death. Exodus 1:15 through 22. Jacob took a basket, waterproofed it, and sent the baby down the river into a basket. And one of Pharaoh's daughters spotted the basket and retrieved the child, and she eventually adopted him into the royal family and gave him the name Moses. He went on to become a faithful and blessed servant of God, and those are found in the books of Exodus. In the book of Esther, a beautiful girl named Esther, who was adopted by her cousin after her parents' death, became a queen. And God used her to bring deliverance to the Jewish people in the New Testament. And Jesus Christ was conceived through the Holy Spirit instead through the seed of a man. He was adopted and raised by his mother's husband Joseph, who took Jesus on as his own child. Once we give our hearts to Christ, believing and trusting in him alone for salvation, we become a part of his family. Not through the natural process of human conception, but through adoption. For you did not receive a spirit that makes you slave again, but to bear you to receive the spirit of the sonship, adoption. And by him we cry, Abba, Father. Similarly, bringing a person into a family by means of adoption is done by choice, out of love. His unchanging plan has always been to adopt us into his own family by bringing us into himself through Jesus Christ. And this gave him great pleasure. As God adopts those who receive Christ as Savior into his spiritual family, so should we all prayerfully consider adopting children into our own physical families. Clearly, adoption, both in the physical sense and in the spiritual sense, is shown in a favorable light in the scripture. Both of these adopt, and those who are adopted are receiving a tremendous blessing and a privilege that exemplifies by adoption into God's family. And last but not least, I want to add, in the Christian church, we have church mothers, and usually we have 1 or 2 church mothers who takes on the role as the church mother. They serve as role models and providers to those who are in need. They support them. They give them wisdom and advice, and they take them under their wing as nurturers. So in our church, we're always about giving back and supporting and nurturing. And I'm going to cut it off because I was told 5 to 7 minutes, and I don't want to be over the time here.
Before I begin my remarks, I would like to thank our host, Cyma Shapiro, and the Hartford Seminary for putting together tonight's event to discuss the important topic of motherhood. Also, it is an honor to serve on this panel with all of these other distinguished women here tonight. As the cantor of a Reformed synagogue, I am a very liberal Jew who does not strictly follow Jewish law. But I will do my best to give a general overview of where Judaism stands on the issue of motherhood. And I'll try to keep my remarks as brief as possible, but as anyone from my synagogue knows, we may be here all night. Cyma gave each of us a list of questions ahead of time to try to address in our opening remarks, so I'll try to talk about them as best I can. In Hebrew, the word for mother is em. Mothers are imahot, and motherhood is the word imahut. In modern Hebrew, mother, mom, or mommy is simply referred to as the diminutive ima. In the Jewish tradition, there are several notable women who play key roles as mothers that greatly influenced events in the Torah and the Tanakh. The most recognizable mother figures in the Jewish religion are four matriarchs: Sarah, wife of our patriarch Abraham, Rebecca, wife of Isaac, and Rachel and Leah, the wives of Jacob. All of these women were recognized in our faith for their dedication to God and their actions which strengthened the Jewish people in faith. So how are these mother figures represented in the Jewish faith? Well, Sarah is portrayed as being endowed with miraculous fertility. Having been barren for so many years of marriage, it was a miracle that she would give birth at the advanced age of around 90. And just to emphasize this miraculous feat of fertility, a midrash, which is a commentary on the books of the Torah in the Talmud, states that when Isaac was still a toddler, his parents threw a party in his honor where Sarah is said to have had enough milk in her breast to breastfeed every child who was there. So, does the Jewish faith promote the institution of motherhood? Yes, yes, and triple yes. In some Orthodox traditions, marriage is encouraged right after high school, and if not right after high school, then during or after a secondary school of some kind. Well, one of the first commandments that we are given in the Torah, in Genesis, is to be fruitful and multiply. So Jews take this very seriously because the family and home in Judaism is the nucleus of the faith. This is where the Jewish woman shines as the mother of happy children who become faithful Jews. It is through the mother at home that Jewish children learn to follow everyday Jewish laws. She, in essence, is their first spiritual teacher. Another great question was, regarding motherhood, what do I personally see as the biggest differences and similarities between Judaism and other religions? I don't see any differences. I only see similarities. Whether a woman in any religion gives birth or chooses to adopt a child, we all want the best for our child and work to make that happen as they grow into adulthood. We revel in our children's successes, we worry when they are sick, and we lift them up when they are down. And no matter what age our children are, mine are 27 and almost 30, and they will always be an important part of our lives, and we will always love them no matter what. So where does Judaism stand on surrogacy, adoption, abortion, in vitro fertilization, and blended families? Well, the Reform movement leaves personal decisions like this up to the individual couples to deal with. It feels that the couples themselves and their doctors are the best judges of what works best for their particular situation. More traditional denominations of Judaism, such as conservative and orthodoxy, vary depending on which rabbi you consult or which sect of Judaism you adhere to. For instance, surrogacy can sometimes be looked upon by some rabbis as very similar to baby selling, or looked upon as a form of slavery for women. Also, because one's Jewishness is determined by being born of a Jewish mother, this could cause a problem with the Jewish status of the baby and make it difficult for the child to find a marriage partner within the community when they grow up. Abortion in Orthodox communities can also differ depending upon which rabbi you consult. Generally, if there is no harm to the mother during pregnancy, there should be no abortion. There are, however, extenuating circumstances where abortion may be allowed, such as the health of the mother in carrying the child to term, or if the pregnancy is the result of a rape where the presence of the child might be a traumatic reminder of the event and cause the mother irreparable psychological damage. Birth control is also not usually allowed in Orthodox Judaism unless there are extenuating medical circumstances. The thinking on this is that it is not the couple who decides the size of their family, but God. So where does Judaism stand on older mothers? Well, all denominations of Judaism encourage women to be mothers, and like Sarah, our matriarch, it can happen at any age. As long as there are no problems with pregnancy or adoption, and they are happy with the decision, it's fine. Unfortunately, time doesn't allow me to address all of the issues in more detail or allow me to answer all of Cyma's questions, but I hope that I have given you a little taste of how Judaism responds to the subject of motherhood. And if you have any further interest in learning about the subject from a Jewish perspective, I hope that you will reach out and contact one of our fine rabbis in the greater Hartford area for more clarification. Thank you for your time this evening.
So of the traditions that we're talking about this evening, I think Quakerism is probably the most recent. We trace our origins out of the Christian tradition, but beginning really in the 1650s. And in England, time of great tumult. And from the beginning, we named women ministers. The very beginning of the tradition holds that God speaks to women just as much as God speaks to men. And that sometimes women are actually more faithful. And there are, because of that tradition, in the time period from 1650 to 1670, of all of the first edition documents available written by women, almost half are Quakers. Because the women were writing, they were speaking, they were preaching, and interestingly enough, they were traveling. So one of the early leaders was a woman named Margaret Fell. And she played a key role. She was one of the first that joined the tradition from an upper class. So she had resources that the community could use. Her home became sort of a central gathering place. She wrote a lot of letters. She was managing and coordinating the travel that people were doing around England at that point and then beyond. There's a lot of sort of metaphors that were used in that early time that used the motherhood images, but also put them with men, so that the care of Christ is as a mother hen for her chickens. That the love of God is compared to the love of a nursing mother. And they carried this concept of nursing mothers. Margaret Fell was known as one of the nursing mothers because of the work that she did in nurturing the life of the Spirit. Two pieces of that. Some of the ways that we get at that language is just a couple of short letters. A man writing to her, to Margaret, saying, "A nursing mother thou art, who feeds the hungry with good things, but the fat with judgment, who kills and slays the living and raises the dead. Judgment is committed into thy hands, and judgment thou givest to whom judgment belongs." So this very clear understanding that from the beginning that women had this critical role in making visible God's Spirit on earth. Margaret had 9 kids, and I want to read just a little excerpt of a letter that she sent to her family. She was in London and left her kids at home. She says, "My dear lambs and babes of God, the Father of you all, my dear love flows freely unto you. Dear hearts, my way and time of return is not yet manifested to me, but here I am set fast, the will of the Lord, to fill every job and tittle, which is the desire of my soul. Last week we received a letter which made mention of Bridget, one of her daughter's not being well, I would have her to drink at least 20 days of her jaundice drink, and I would have her take a quantity of aloes. So she's very much on top of the medicine, gets her good sleep. She's on top of those things, even though she's clear that God is calling her to be someplace else. And that tension of walking both fully as a mother and also carrying the life of the Spirit within the structure of the church is something that Quakerism has carried for the last 400 years, 150 years. So it's very interesting to read the stories of the men saying, yes, I'm prepared to release my wife to go off and travel, and I'll stay home with the kids. In that time period, because it was definitely not the norm. To say a little bit about the structures of how we do theology, doctrine, it's a little bit different for Quakerism, because we understand that the Spirit is there, that God is there for each of us to listen to, and that it's in the listening community that together we hear God speaking to us. And so we don't have a formal set of doctrine, so it's not like someone can say, yes, we agree with this or this or this. What happens is that together, New England Yearly Meeting right now is in the process of writing our book, of revising our book of faith and practice. And it's a long process, 15 years at this point, of listening. Where do we hear the Spirit calling us? And how do we together listen to those words and name what the Spirit calls us to? So it's a very different way of thinking about doctrine and theology. And so those questions of where does Quakerism stand are a little difficult because different monthly meetings stand in different places. In the 1980s, Hartford Friends meeting approved a minute, which is again how we make these formal decisions, that said that we would take same-gender couples under our care. And so the way Quakers do marriage is also different because we understand that God marries the couple. And so there is no officiant. At the ceremony, the couple marry each other in the presence of the community and with God as the celebrant. So that gives us a slightly different possibility for having those weddings, and we have been for over 20 years, for 30 years in some meetings. The overarching way in which we carry motherhood, I would have to say, is that there's an archetype of those gifts of nurture that we hold not just within the family, but that we hold in all dimensions of our lives. And that we're invited to hold those characteristics, and that we acknowledge that not everyone is called to the same things. And that we hold that how the Spirit speaks to and invites individuals to live out their lives, each one of us has that challenge of living a faithful life. And to better and worse degrees, we're able to support each other in doing that. I think that for every tradition, there's a tension between the theology that we hold and the way we put it into practice. And we too are not always at our best. But we do try and hold that respect and love for the individual's decisions as they struggle, while also holding throughout our history that there are lots of options. And that very early on we were clear that women needed to be educated and that they had lots of paths open to them, in addition to having families.
rocks the cradle is the hand that rules the world, is a commonly quoted phrase by William Ross Wallace, which brings to light the power that mothers have in shaping the world at large. Islam reveres and upholds motherhood in a way so deserved, one could only be humbled through the understanding of what motherhood truly is. A clear illustration of this understanding comes from a famous story from the life of the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him. When a man came to the Prophet and said, "O Messenger of God, who from amongst mankind deserves the best companionship from me?" He replied, "Your mother." The man then asked, "Then who?" So he replied, "Your mother." The man then asked again, "Then who?" So the Prophet replied, "Your mother." The man then replied, "Then who?" So he replied, "Then your father." The Prophet Muhammad replied 3 times, "Your mother," before mentioning your father. Why the emphasis on your mother? The high status of motherhood is proven through this saying of the Prophet Muhammad. It is evident that the mother's honor is elevated compared to that of the father. In the Holy Quran, God Almighty explains to humanity of the pains and toils a mother endures when bearing a child. He explains a mother's journey of carrying a child, delivering a child, and then also caring for the child after delivery. And we have enjoined on man to be dutiful and good to his parents. His mother bore him in weakness and hardship, upon weakness and hardship. And his weaning is in 2 years. Give thanks to me and your parents. Unto me is the final destination. And in another chapter of the Quran, God restates the same idea. And we have enjoined on man to be good and dutiful to his parents. His mother bears him with hardship, and she brings him forth with hardship. The bearing of him and weaning of him is 30 months. These verses speak to me as a reminder not of my journey and hardships of being a mother, but of my responsibility to my own mother. I believe these verses are a reminder to have mercy on all mothers. One can only be inclined to empathize with his or her mother. After all, we could not have come into this world without our mothers. A dear friend once reminded me of how much we should respect our mothers because of the very fact that, had a mother not cared for his or her child, the child would not have been able to survive without the caring and hardships that the mother had to endure. Hence, a child is helpless without a mother to care for him or her. Mercy is what comes to mind when one thinks of a mother and her child. She gives unconditional love and endearing affection for her child, not expecting anything in return. There are 99 names of God. 2 of the most often used names are Ar-Rahman and Ar-Rahim. Most merciful and most merciful are my favorite translations in the English language. The womb of the mother, named Rahm, is the root word referring to one of God's glorious names. What a beautiful correlation. We believe one of the ways of attaining paradise is through pleasing our mothers. One of the companions of the Prophet wanted to join the Muslim army in battle. The companion was told by the Prophet that if he had a mother, that he should stay with her. For paradise is beneath the mother's feet. The meaning of paradise beneath the mother's feet communicates that by the pure act of serving and respecting your mother, you attain eternal paradise. Even the small constant things that mothers do are looked upon by God with such love, compassion, and great reward. No matter how small and redundant they may seem to mothers, like changing a baby's diaper, God rewards the mother immensely because of the fact that it is a constant, repetitive deed that takes place. The constant reward of good deeds that God gives applies to both male and female. But this saying of the Prophet Muhammad is one that I hold near and dear because of what it means to mothers. The messenger of God said, "Do as many good deeds as you are capable of doing, for God will not become weary or tired of giving you reward." The deed liked most by God is the one to which the doer adheres to constantly, even if it be small. Islam's emphasis of respect and upliftment is on the mother, but it also enjoins us to uphold both parents. وَبِالْوَالِدَيْنِ إِحْسَانًا, which means, and be best to your parents. Proof that the emphasis of respect to the mother is directed by God is in the meanings of what mother and father are in the Quran. Walid and walida are words used to describe the biological form of what a father and a mother are to their child. Is the more respectable term for mother, and Eb is the more respectable term for father. Is the term used for mother in the Quran. God uses to describe the mother, but does not use the term Eb to describe the father. When the mother carries the child and delivers the child, she already has achieved the status of whereas the father, Walid, has yet to achieve the status of Eb by taking care of his child. And so this concept leads to whose hand rocks the cradle of this world. I would only hope that through these examples of how we should revere motherhood, we would caress and hold near the hand that rules this world. Thank you.
I will be here to represent Buddhism, but in particular the Tibetan Buddhism. And there are many branches of Buddhism. There are the Theravadins, there are the Zen practitioners, and then some other Chinese and Japanese branches of Buddhism. And there's the Korean Buddhism. And so for me, I was introduced to the Tibetan branch of Buddhism. And it basically arrived in the West in 1959 when they flee Tibet, when it was invaded by the communist Chinese. And so through the Dalai Lama and all the other practitioners, Dalai Lama was the spiritual head and the leader of Tibet, sought refuge in India, and that is where he and many other leaders and practitioners and Tibetans live, and they have then since established many monasteries and nunneries. So my center, Hartford Karma or Hartford KTC, means the place where the three branches of Buddhism is taught, the Hinayana, Mahayana, and Vajrayana. And it is the affiliate center of Karma Dharma Chakra, or KTD, located in Woodstock, New York, KTD Monastery and Retreat Center. So in the Tibetan Buddhism, there are many, I can say with mother examples, but I chose to use two mother figures, because it is linked to how we will try to embody as a Tibetan Buddhist mother, practitioner, parent, father, and this is what we do to embody, the qualities of those two basically very common transcendental figures. And there are two of them that I would mention. I'm sure there's a few, but the most common is the Prajna Paramita, is the mother of all the Buddhas, in the sense that all beings who achieve enlightenment, achieve Buddhahood, do so by means of arousing the transcendental wisdom. Nothing other than this wisdom can cause ultimate enlightenment. Just as mothers are the ones who give birth to all the children on the path, this wisdom, transcendental wisdom, gives birth to all who achieve enlightenment. Prajnaparamita, as a female Buddha, is an embodiment of or symbol for that wisdom. The second mother figure, which also I would like to probably spend a few more description of her, is the expression of Mother of all Buddhas is also used for Arya Tara or Noble Tara. Because Tara is the embodiment of or symbol for Buddha's enlightened activity, or Buddha karma. Thus she is also called as karma activity or karma lady. Transcendental wisdom may be the direct force that arouses the enlightenment experience, but transcendent activity or the Buddha karma is the force fostering the conditions that make the birth of this wisdom possible. So, with that, they are considered basically as like the spiritual mother, the supreme mother, which we will try to invoke and embody her qualities. There's the wisdom part and the transcendental wisdom and the compassion. So in the Mahayana practice of Buddhism, Mahayana means greater vehicle in the sense that our intention to practice is in order that we can also be of benefit to all beings. It's basically we practice to engender that altruistic motivation. So even as we are, if we practice in the sense of a mother's or parents in general, the idea is that it became a training ground for us to engender the qualities. And so by loving it becomes like that kind of compassionate flame, you know? So just like if you have gas stove, you need that light, the pilot light, in order then you can, have that flame. And so through our love of our children, as in this case we're talking about mothers, and there are fathers here too, but fathers and mothers, through that love, the idea is that we engender that in the sense that we will also be able to transcend and love all beings, in the sense to take care that all beings become our children, and that same likewise, all beings are also our mothers. Having to help that as a meditational tool to basically help us as we go from the egoic and unconscious way we lead our life to a much more conscious and mindful way we lead our life. In this case, to engender, for us to practice, to be a mindful, conscious, aware parent. Because we know we can have those ideals to be what it is to be a good parent, but then we run against our habitual pattern. There are habitual patterns which we have mental patterns of anger or jealousy, or when we are stressed, we are short. And then we become mechanical in our lives as we become very busy in our lives. So through the practice of this, in that sense, is that we kind of recognize that our limitations. And so in the training, in terms of that, through the training of meditation, we then be able to become aware of our actions first and have increased self-awareness. So, so when we call up Mother Tara, basically, in the practice of, in Tibetan Buddhism at some point, we recognize that we have always been her. So Tara or Prajnaparamita is also a symbolic figure and a transcendental deity that we call on to remind us so that we can cultivate and engender our heart and our mind that our true potential also to become like her. So, and it teaches basically the idea of the Bodhisattva idea in terms of our body, our speech, and mind. So, And then now we call that with regards to when we call our mantra, we are calling ourselves. Basically, that is our true selves, our divine spark in our true selves. And through that, we will have basically a sacred outlook. And the idea is to carry that over when we see our children, to have that sacred outlook, that they have that divine spark, that we don't own their children, but we are here as guardians, to help them, onto the path. And in case as a Buddhist, basically that they will also in turn follow the path of altruistic, compassion and activities in the world. But ultimately the goal is that not just for our children, for all beings, that they will have the transcendental life where it's a permanent cessation of suffering and the permanent attainment or a change in happiness. Because for as long as we will also the relative happiness is in the world, to have the comforts in the world, which is we view the world as not permanent. But then temporarily there are just conditions, but also in the long term that eventually we hope that one achieves its true and maximum potential, that is to awaken to the true potential of the true nature. Now how it is now practiced in contemporary world, now in the 20th century, is through the mindfulness practice, through the meditation. Now is neuroscience and psychologists discover through putting these things for the monks, that this neuroscientists discovered of how our mind works when one is have practiced, are meditators, and they called it after 10,000 hours of meditation. About that, they call them mental Olympians. And the idea is that they discovered that through the practice of compassion practice, and there are some methodologies, skills that we do in the Buddhism, is that they just see that there is that in the limbic system, that part of the emotion for practitioners of there. We have also a compassion practice, we actually is a mind training and a heart training. And they saw that part around the limbic system is actually muscular, bone muscle. So therefore, that it gives them steady of that compassionate work. It's not like jerk action, like you push my button, and we were able to work with our mind. The idea is to work with our mind skillfully and being more aware. So it is now in neuroscience, it's also called it can stimulate through the mindfulness practice, it can stimulate the prefrontal cortex of the brain. So that with the prefrontal cortex of the brain is the link, which is our modern brain now, that we would not live in a fight, flight, or fright, the way we manage or live our life. So here applied in the daily stresses of raising children, one becomes more of a skilled parent. So another thing that Buddhism too is that we see that all beings have the true nature. So we will kind of raise our kids that they have the true worth, the intrinsic inherent worth that is unchanging, that regardless of whether you may have ADD, or you may be dyslexic, or you may be poor in math, or you may not be as beautiful or skinny as the other girls, that you have your value is not so much on that, but really that you have that intrinsic nature. Or you may, or other kinds of things, you may be lazy or what, but you're still having this view that there are ways to have that intrinsic goodness or intrinsic purity. So likewise, so when they grow up, they will say, oh, I have this anger issue, I have this addiction, but inherently, fundamentally, I have this true Buddha nature or divine spark, and this problem I just need to work on. So it's as opposed to, I have this problem, I have that, therefore there must be inherently something wrong with me. So here is the idea, is to engender, to raise whole, look at them as a whole being, and healthy in mind, body, and spirit, and cultivating the heart and loving kindness and wisdom. And with regards to whether, questions whether what is the real Buddhism in regards to surrogacy, adoption, there's no strong view in the ideas which we want to adopt all beings as our children and all beings as our mothers and fathers. So if the idea there is your altruistic and intention, which it's to raise a child by any other means, there's no strong opinion about it. So, but thank you.
That was amazing. I had many questions to ask, but I think there was so much material covered. I think I'm going to just cut to the chase. I would like to hear from each of the panelists on how they feel. Step back. I would like to hear from the panelists on how they feel about contemporary society. What is the most common misconception that your religion, that society believes about your religion and all of the ethical issues that are now transpiring, ethical issues of IVF, same-sex fathers, or using surrogates. And I know that to some degree most of you answered it, but there's a nuts and bolts, finite discussion that needs to be had when you're actually talking about the actual practice of utilizing someone else's sperm, someone else's egg. When you're talking about same-sex parenting, you're not talking about just women, you're talking about two men. The first question is for all of you, what is the most common misconception that society would feel about what your religion dictates? And the second question would be, where does your edge, where does your religious doctrine, your religious belief, your philosophy, ideology, where does it hit against all of the ever-changing mores that we're now being faced with? Bridget?
Christianity is, well, I guess I was somewhere in the Middle East, and an old world Christian said, we gave you one form of Christianity and you took it and shattered it into a million pieces. And I would say that's partly what it is that there is no one particular view in Christianity. It is perhaps the most diverse of all, and you could go from one end of the spectrum, even within my own denomination, as to where we fall on these things. And so that's a really difficult question to answer because it is so fractured. And but I would say that that is one of the most frustrating parts about it, is that often people will put Christianity into one box. And I'm sure all of us feel that way about our faith, that people don't understand the diversity of it. I do think, though, that we could all agree in some way that we are all created in the image of the divine somehow, and that the divine resides in all of us. And I guess that's what, I would just say could be our commonality between all of us, but even among Christians, I would hope. But it's impossible to answer that question. It is.
I'm just sitting here thinking it is impossible to answer that question, really.
So yeah, I guess I will need to just ask one more time. Where does the religion come up against our ever-changing society? The traditional family unit is no longer really relevant.
Well, in the United Church of Christ, our tagline is God is still speaking. So I never place a period where God has placed a comma. Thank you, Grace Allen. And so that idea that God is evolving, God's word is evolving, and the life of the human, how humans are created and how they were created to be in relationship, how they are meant to procreate, is evolving. And that the point of God creating us was to be in relationship with each other and with God. So that's broad, but I think I would say that that's where we would stand in that openness.
You do not?
I think you just pretty much answered my question in a sense that I think a lot of people think of Judaism as just Orthodox Judaism, and myself as a Reform Jew, there's even within Orthodoxy there are a lot of differences. There are ultra-Orthodox who, even within different sects, they have different allowances and etc. And then there's modern Orthodox, which is much more liberal, and then there's Reform Jews who are even more liberal than that. I would have to say that I kind of, as a Reform Jew, feel the same way that you do, that God hasn't had the last word on life and doctrine, and that as a person with an open mind, I need to continually to strive to listen to what God's telling me on a daily basis. And with Reform Judaism, we our stand on different subjects depend on what's going on in the world at the time, and things change at a very fast pace. So so our stand could change over 20 to 40 years, depending on that. That's what I would have to say. That would be my answer.
Well, as I said earlier, it's really impossible to say where Quakers are on anything. They joke about if there's 100 Quakers in the room, you'll have 500 opinions. I mean, so but if you ask me personally, I would say that the two edges, first of all, I can't say anything about where we come up against people, what other people think about us. I don't even know where to go with that one. But the edges, I would say, are sexual ethics. That how do we live our lives and teach our children to be whole sexual beings in a way that honors that of God in each of us. That traditionally there were lines and you could draw lines and say you do this and you don't do this. And we know now that you can have abusive power in a heterosexual marriage, and you can have abusive power outside of it. And so what are the ethics that we need to carry today? And then the second would be, how do we hold the Spirit moving in our technology? When is it getting in the way of God's will? And when is it facilitating God's will? And how do we individually listen to when, yes, that's the path I should take. Let me go, let's use IVF. And when, at the individual level, am I saying, I want the kid, I don't care what's best, I want the kid. And so there isn't an answer. I would say that there's this edge of when are we listening and how do we hold that these technologies are neither all good or all bad.
Okay. Well, first of all, I am a practicing Muslim, very passionate about Islam. I know quite a bit about Islam, but when it comes to certain topics, I feel that it's a big responsibility to take on an answer to a question where it involves scholarly opinion. In Islam, we believe in the Quran. The Quran was revealed 1,400 years ago, and not a letter has changed since then. No one is allowed to change the Quran or the words of the Quran. So there are some things that are clear, and there's some things that are not clear. in terms of gays and lesbians and having children and like adopting children, and I know that first of all I can say that Islam permits friendship among the same sex. One of the purposes of the sexual relationships are for procreation. That's what Islam believes. Which we believe that it cannot occur in a same-sex relationship. And if it was the natural way, then humankind would come to an end. That's how we feel. We also feel that God created males and females as mates, also among the plant and animal kingdom as well. And the only permissible sexual relationship in Islam is between a man and a woman under the contract and confines of a marriage. So any other sexual relation, whether it's heterosexual, outside of marriage, or homosexual, is not permitted. So this is also the stance in original scriptures of Judaism and Christianity. The focus is procreation and preservation of the family, which does not happen except under the confines of a lawful marriage. How does Islam view gays and lesbians? There's no lashing out against them or mistreatment of them or in any way like that. But we feel that we're all held accountable before God. We're all going to be standing before God one day, no matter whatever decision we make in our lives. At the end of the day, it's between us and God. So on that subject, that's what I would say on that subject. And in vitro and artificial insemination, I really don't feel qualified to answer that question, but I'll tell you that in Islam, it's the right of the child to know its biological parent, and it has to be within as well, like the precincts of a marriage. And adoption is definitely encouraged and it's allowed, but then again, I can't go into whether it has to be a married couple or not married. I can't go into that, but I do know that that it has to be that adoption is definitely encouraged, and it's a beautiful thing and a very good thing to take care of an orphan, definitely. I also have a book. It's called Moral Issues in 6 Religions, and there's a quote from the book, which is from the Jewish perspective of homosexuality, and it says, in Jewish thinking, a man feeling attracted to another woman is no different than him being attracted to someone else's wife. In both cases, allowing his attraction to lead to a sexual relationship is a sin. However, Judaism does not permit men or women with homosexual leanings to be persecuted or discriminated against. Okay, and that's pretty much it.
In Buddhism, there's there is in vitro, adoption, surrogacy. There are no strong doctrines or opinions against it, so it's really no problem. But maybe if what when I was thinking would be what would be the challenge of modern family life now with regards to us as a Buddhist practitioner. Well, number one, stress, busy life, we're busy, we're about doing. That sometimes it's a challenge to do our meditation practice or other spiritual practices, and it's a challenge to be mindful, and also to be because part of that is to also train about emotional intelligence and be fully present with our kids. Sometimes we arrive and kids come home and And they said, okay, you're just doing mechanical and not truly listening. So when they come, I just say to the parents, when the children come, sometimes there's a thing when even if it's just for 10 seconds or 2 minutes, when you're fully present, when your child hears you, and it would fill up their tank for that feeling. Oh, okay, I've been heard. They can say. Even my cat will know when I wake up, and I would just mechanically put the kibbles on his plate, and then open the windows because he likes the window after he eats. He wouldn't eat even. He would just tire his thoughts. Oh, yes, it's my mindfulness teacher practice, and then I will be with him. So it is the stress of modern life right now that we sometimes we fail to apply really what we try to embody in terms of us to train our heart and our mind.
Does anyone have any questions? I'm sorry,
You've got me. Just because we're Christian, our doctrines are just a little bit different. In our doctrine, we believe in the biblical principles and appropriations between a man and a woman. We do not believe in same-sex parents in our religion, in our doctrine. I'll say in our doctrine. We do not believe that. There was many instances that I read in the Bible that spoke about surrogacy, yes, and adoption, yes, but none of those instances were between a woman and a woman or a man and a man. That's just our principles. Biblical principles is where we stand. And the Bible does say be fruitful and multiply. But some people say, well, it doesn't say specifically in the Bible that it has to be a man and a woman. Yes, a man and a woman. However, that's the way it was set up in the Bible, and as Reverend Felder was saying, that God is going to still be God, and we honor the Bible and everything that is in the Bible. So unless it says differently, and sort of as Hannah said, the Bible has not changed. We can't add to it, or we can't multiply, from it. But we stand on those principles, and that's where we are. So for me to say that IVF, how the Bible speaks on IVF, the Bible doesn't speak about IVF, but however, it talks about being a nurturer. It also talks about life as well. So I can't really say either yes or no about the IVF piece of that, but that's where we stand on it. But like in our Christian beliefs, we believe in taking in children that are orphan children. We believe in helping children. We believe in loving children and bringing them into families. In our Christian denomination is also, I spoke with you about Queen Esther, which is a program that seeks out foster and adoptive parents to take the children into their home and to care for them. So that's kind of where we stand. I don't want to take too much time, but that's our principles.
Any questions from anyone in the audience? Well, I want to thank you all for coming. It's a beautiful thing, as I said at the beginning, to be one-on-one with people of different faiths and leave all of the rest of the topics aside and have nothing but faith, spirituality, truthfulness, love, motherhood. That's all it's about. I would like to leave you with a prayer, if I could. At this time, I would like to pray for new mothers coming to terms with new responsibility, for expectant mothers wandering and waiting, for those who are tired, stressed, or depressed, for those who struggle to balance the tasks of work and family, for those who are unable to feed their children due to poverty, for those whose children have physical, mental, or emotional disabilities, for those who have children they do not want, for those who raise children on their own, for those who have lost a child, for those who care for the children of others, for those whose children have left home, and for those who desire to be a mother as has not been fulfilled. Bless all mothers, that their love may be deep and tender, and that they may lead their children to know and do what is good, living not for themselves alone, but for God and for others.